Jack the Ripper case, given silent witness treatment to reveal new evidence. He had 6 victims in WA. A BBC documentary fronted by Amelia Fox uses latest police technology to re-examine the unsolved murders. 39 stab wounds punctured Martha Abram's breasts and genitals when her lifeless body was found outside an apartment block in Whitechapel, London. It was a crime that left police puzzled for over 130 years. Martha, a prostitute, had been brutally murdered. But who had committed such a terrible crime, and why? Martha Abram was murdered on August 7, 1888. On the night of August 7, 1888, prostitute Martha Abram was out drinking with a friend, known as Pearly Pole, when they met a couple of soldiers. The mum of 2 had fallen on hard times since splitting from her husband and had been forced to sell sex to make ends meet. At 11:45 p.m., Martha left with the soldier and was seen entering George Yard buildings in London's Whitechapel. The following morning, at 5 a.m., a labourer found her body at the foot of his apartment building. She had been stabbed. Although Martha was murdered just 3 weeks before Jack the Ripper started his infamous Whitechapel killing spree, a 39-year-old was never counted as one of the 5 known victims saw until now. Between August and November 1888, Martha and 5 other women were murdered on the streets of Whitechapel. As the killing spree progressed, each body was found more mutilated than the last as the killer cut off body parts and disemboweled his victims for sexual kicks. Using detailed notes from the investigation at the time, Amelia and criminologist Professor David Wilson recreate the crime scenes to gain a greater understanding of the killer's methods. Experts also use a digital autopsy table high-tech equipment which allows investigators to see internal organs of a woman's body and draw wounds onto the image to detail the horrific injuries inflicted on the victims. The Ripper's next victim, Polly Nichols, was found dead at 3:40 am on Friday 31 August Indiana Bucks Row. Her throat had been cut with a knife penetrating as far as her backbone. Then her abdomen was carved open and her genitals were stabbed in what Professor Wilson deemed a sexualized act of overkill. He's used far more force than is necessary to kill the victim, he explains. Once he's killed her. Her next victim, Annie Chapman, was seen going into 29 Hanbury Street at 5 a.m. on Saturday, September 8, with man a witness later described as shabby genteel. She was found dead an hour later. Her throat had been. On the early hours of Sunday, September 30th, Liz Stride had her throat cut in Dutfield's yard, but it's thought the killer was interrupted because she was not mutilated. Israel Schwartz, who saw the Ripper attack Stride but dismissed it as a domestic, described the man as 30 years old, about 5 ft 5 in, fair complexion, dark hair with a brown moustache, wearing a dark jacket with a black peaked cap. The same morning, Catherine Eddowes was murdered in Mitre Square. Her throat was cut, her bowel was draped over her shoulder, and for the first time, he attacked the face, cutting both eyelids, cutting the nose and slashing around the mouth. Professor Wilson concluded that having to leave Stride's body without mutilation had left the Ripper's bloodlust unsatisfied. He's sexually frustrated, so he runs off in search of another victim, he said. He's not simply interested in killing. He kills Liz Stride, but this is about his own misogynistic sexual needs after the woman has died. Witness Joseph Lawton saw Eddowes talking to a man of 30, 5 ft 7 in, a fair complexion and a small fair mustache. This time, he was wearing a salt and pepper jacket, a red neckerchief and a grey peaked cap, suggesting he may have changed his outfit between the 2 attacks. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was the only one killed in her room, and the Ripper's sick fantasies came to the fore. Her throat had been severed to the spine, then her organs were cut out from her body and arranged around the room, with her breasts and kidneys placed on the table next to the bed. Her heart was missing, and her face was gashed in all directions with her nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears partially removed. Alone in the room, he's got time to be with a dead victim, said David. Here he is exploring. When he's got time to be alone with a dead woman, he disfigures, he dehumanizes, he obliterates. Having gathered all the information on the dead women, the pair turned to a computer system called Holmes Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, set up in the wake of the Yorkshire Ripper murders to help police establish a pattern in serial murders. Inputting the details of 11 murders in the Whitechapel area in 1888, the computer rules out 5 that don't fit the pattern, but concludes that Martha Tabram's death fits. Having walked the streets of Whitechapel, having looked at the MO, and in particular having seen the evidence presented from Holmes, I've got absolutely no doubt that Martha Tabram is the first of the Jack the Ripper victims, concludes Professor Wilson. The find helps to narrow down the suspects through geoprofiling, establishing where a killer is most likely to live through looking at the sites of their crimes. Expert Dr. Sam Lundgren reveals killers are either commuters or marauders, traveling away from home to commit crimes or striking in a pattern around their own homes, leaving a buffer zone to distance themselves. Serial killers fall into the marauding pattern 85–90% of the time, and the first murder, Professor Wilson says, is most likely to be close to home because the killer wouldn't know what to expect and would need to get to a place of safety quickly. The geoprofiling identifies a small area of Whitechapel, in the center of the 6 murder sites, where the killer is likely to live. Professor Wilson is then able to dismiss the many theories surrounding the identity of the killer, including speculation that the Ripper was Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson. The prince, known as Eddie, was thought to have caught syphilis in the Navy, which turned him into a psychopath. The problem with that is that the Eddie had an alibi, says Professor Wilson. He's not actually in London when several of the murders occur. The night of the double, painter Walter Sickert, who was suspected because of his obsession with the murders and a series of paintings depicting the scenes, was also ruled out because he was on holiday in France and painted one of his most famous paintings, The October Sun, while some of the murders were taking place. James Maybrick, who apparently claimed to be the Ripper in a diary that emerged in 1992, was discounted because tests exposed the diary as a fake. Francis Tumblety, a doctor from the US who lived in Whitechapel, was also suspected. Amelia Fox said he was later charged with gross indecency after having sex with 5 different men. He undoubtedly, but Professor Wilson explained, he has a striking appearance. He's tall, he has a huge handlebar mustache, and crucially he speaks with an American accent. Neither of the 2 witnesses mentioned any of these characteristics. Instead, Professor Wilson identifies Polish immigrant Aaron Kozminski, who moved to Whitechapel in the early 1880s and worked as a hairdresser. Aaron, who was in his mid-20s, lived with his brother and sister in Zion Square, in the center of the murder sites. Medical records say he suffered from mental health issues from 1885, becoming paranoid. He heard voices, and he would later claim that those voices made him behave in a particularly violent way, David revealed. Living so close meant he had time to go home, change, and wash on the day of the double murder, explaining the different clothing described by the 2 witnesses. After the Kelly murder, Kozminski was questioned in house-to-house inquiries, and police began to watch him, informally, which may explain the fact that he never murdered again. In 1890, his family put him in a workhouse infirmary because he was attacking his sister with a knife. He was then moved through various asylums and died of gangrene in 1919. He lives in Whitechapel. He's somebody who can blend into the background and has a history of violence, said Professor Wilson. He fits all our. Amelia concludes, at the end of our cold case review, we feel confident that with the help of new technology, we have shed new light on the case of Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper: The Case Reopened airs tonight on BBC One at 9 p.m.
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.